Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine for a moment, the Bible isn't actually a history book about, faraway people and events, but maybe it's an incredible, profound guide to your own mind.
That really is the radical, almost startling starting point of the perspective we're diving into today.
Yeah.
We're looking at this unique way of understanding the Bible and maybe surprisingly, how it connects to manifesting your desires and, well, understanding reality itself, all through the lens of Neville Goddard's teachings based on the source material we've got here.
Right. So our mission, sort of with this deep dive, is to take this fundamentally different viewpoint, one that reinterprets these ancient texts through a psychological lens, pull out the core principles, extract the most important nuggets, and really see what it offers us for understanding ourselves and, yeah, how we might actually shape our world.
And you should get ready for some, well, surprising insights.
Yeah. Like what?
Like biblical characters potentially being parts of your own consciousness, the immense, maybe even divine power of your imagination, and importantly, a practical technique you might just be able to start applying in your own life.
Okay, practical. I like that.
Yeah.
So where do we start? What's the foundation here?
What's absolutely fascinating right out of the gate is the fundamental premise presented in the source material. The ancient storytellers, the ones who wrote the Bible, they were really documenting objective historical facts as we think of them.
Not history.
Not in the literal sense, no. They were creating these allegorical picture lessons, really vivid stories designed to illustrate basic psychological principles, things that are eternally true about human consciousness.
Okay, so it's like the difference between holding a grain of corn, just the physical thing, and understanding that inside that kernel is the whole potential. The stalk, the leaves, more corn.
Exactly like that. The story, the characters, the events, the history, that's just the outer form, kind of the husk. The real substance, the psychological truth, that's the life germ inside, just waiting for our, well, the source calls it our awakened intuitive faculties to find it.
Awakened intuitive faculties.
Yeah.
Interesting phrase. And this way of seeing the Bible, it leads somewhere pretty radical about reality itself.
It really does. It leads directly to this concept from the source. Consciousness is the one and only reality. Not a reality alongside others, but the reality, period.
The only reality. Wow.
Yeah. We are, in fact, incapable of seeing anything other than the contents of our own consciousness sort of pushed out, externalized, the world out there. It's constantly molding itself and bearing witness to what we are conscious of being on the inside.
Okay, hold on. If consciousness is the ultimate reality, then what about God? And us, man, how do they fit?
Well, the source tackles that head on. It tells us quite explicitly God and man are one. Man is created in God's image. And think about it. What is God's name according to the Bible itself?
Wow.
I am. Exactly. And this is where the reinterpretation connects everything. The source links I am directly to our fundamental awareness of being aware, your consciousness itself. Therefore, from this perspective, your own consciousness, that immediate, undeniable sense of I amness, is God.
My own awareness is God. That's a lot to take in.
It is profound. And building right on that, human imagination isn't just idle daydreaming or fantasy. The source presents human imagination not just as a faculty of God, but as God in action.
God in action.
Yes, it explicitly states the eternal body of man is the imagination and that this imagination is God himself.
Yeah.
So your ability to imagine isn't just some human trait, it's the divine creative power operating as you.
Okay. Wow. So my consciousness is God, my imagination is God in action. But how do you do anything with that? Make it tangible?
Right. That's where the central law comes in, according to the source. The law of assumption. Simply put, it's assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. That assumption, that feeling, is the creative act.
Assuming the feeling. Okay, how does that work? What's the mechanism?
This is the core mechanism described. Your assumption, that internal state where you feel your desire is already done, already accomplished, even if it feels completely false or impossible to your logical mind or what your senses are telling you.
Yeah, like if I want a promotion but everything says no way.
Exactly that situation.
Wow.
If you persist in holding and feeling that assumption of being promoted, it will inevitably harden into fact in your external world. It has to.
Harden into fact. How? Where does this happen?
And the source explains how this happens by introducing this idea of a dimensionally larger world.
A dimensionally larger world. Okay, that sounds pretty abstract.
It is, definitely. But the source tries to make it relatable. Think about how time measures reality. It does it without using length, width, height, right? The three dimensions we know about.
Right, time is just time.
Well, time is presented here as a fourth dimension. And the source suggests that The more dimensions an object or a reality has, the more real or substantial it becomes.
Yeah.
Our familiar three-dimensional world, the one we touch and see, is seen as an abstraction, or maybe like a shadow, a less real reflection of a more fundamental, dimensionally larger reality.
Okay. Let me see if I get this. So if I assume the feeling of my desire fulfilled now, I'm not just pretending or wishing, I'm actually moving my consciousness, my core I amness, into this bigger, dimensionally larger world where that desire already exists. Like it's already a solid fact there.
That is precisely the concept described. By experiencing your desired state as real in the present moment within your imagination, you are placing your consciousness into that dimensionally greater reality where it is already a completed fact. Then, the three-dimensional world, our world, has to adjust itself to reflect the state you now occupy in that larger world.
So it's not just philosophy then, there's a practical side, a technique. How do you actually do this law of assumption thing? The source gives steps, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's very practical. First, you define exactly what you desire or wish for. Get really clear on the end result.
Okay, simple enough. Know what you want. What's next?
Then, you select an action or an event that would naturally happen after your desire is fulfilled. This is crucial. It's about the implication of fulfillment, not the wish itself.
The implication, like what I'd be doing if it were true.
Exactly. What would you be doing, feeling, hearing, experiencing if it were already a done deal? Like maybe someone congratulating you on that promotion, or feeling a wedding ring on your finger, or hearing someone say thank you for something you wanted to achieve.
Got it. So a short scene or a feeling that implies it's already real, then what?
The third step is critical. You induce a state akin to sleep. The source calls it a drowsy, relaxed state. You're attentive, but without effort, like you're just about to drift off.
Why drowsy?
Because that state diminishes the vividness and the impact of the outer three-dimensional world. It makes you more receptive to the reality you're creating inside.
So you're calm, relaxed, maybe feeling a bit floaty, but still focused.
Yes, attentive without effort is the key phrase.
Uh-huh.
And in that state, you mentally participate in the action you chose earlier. You don't just watch it like a movie playing in your head.
You're in it.
You are the actor in the scene. Feel yourself actually performing that action here and now. The imaginary sensation must feel as real to you as, say, the chair you're sitting in right now.
Feel the handshake, hear the congratulations, feel the texture of the ring, as real as touching this microphone.
Precisely. Or, alternatively, the source suggests that in that same drowsy state, you could just repeat a short phrase that implies fulfillment. Something simple, saturated with feeling, like thank you, thank you, thank you, or maybe isn't it wonderful? Just repeating it over and over like a lullaby until that single sensation, thankfulness, relief, wonder, completely dominates your mind and pushes everything else out.
And the key thing is, you have to persist in holding this attention and feeling, but without using force, no gritting your teeth.
Absolutely vital. It's not willpower. It's a gentle surrender to the feeling of the wish already being fulfilled. Imagination is the creative tool here, not brute effort or struggle.
Okay. And you mentioned the now. That seems important.
Crucial. You have to make elsewhere here and the future now in your imagination. You must make your desired state feel like a present, undeniable fact to yourself in that moment of assumption.
Okay, this makes a certain kind of sense intellectually. But if I'm doing this, my rational mind, my everyday 3D brain is going to be screaming, yeah, right. How is this actually going to happen? Where's the money coming from? How will that person react? Who's going to make the call?
Yeah, absolutely. Your reason will fight it, and the source is crystal clear on this point. Do not get concerned with the how or the means. That is not your job. That's the work of the dimensionally greater self, that creative power you're aligning with.
It figures out the how.
It determines the means and builds what the source calls the bridge of incident, the series of seemingly natural external events that will lead to the fulfillment. Your reasoning mind, stuck in 3 dimensions, could never devise the way. As the source beautifully puts it, ways appear that you know not of.
Wow. That takes a huge amount of trust, though. Letting go of control over the how.
It absolutely does. It means surrendering the need for that logical, step-by-step plan that our 3-dimensional world usually demands before we feel safe or secure. It's faith, really, in the sense of knowing the end is secure even when you can't see the path yet.
Okay. So, you're imagining this new state, living in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. But your current reality, your old self, defined by all your past experiences and limitations, is still right here pushing back, saying, no, this is real. How do you deal with that internal resistance, that old self?
Right. The source emphasizes that to assume a new concept of self, To truly occupy that new state in consciousness, you must essentially die to the old one. It's a necessary detachment. You just can't bring the baggage, the limitations of the old self into the freedom of the new state.
Die to the old self. And the Bible actually provides allegories for this internal process according to the source.
Yes, many stories are interpreted this way. Think about the allegories of Judas' suicide, Moses' death and burial, and that really intense story of Barabbas and Jesus during the Passover. These are all seen as representing the necessary death of the former concept of self.
How do those stories represent that? Judas' suicide seems pretty negative.
Well, in this interpretation, it's symbolic. Judas represents the old state that betrayed your divine potential. His suicide is seen as this symbolic act of dying to your former limiting concept of self after you have identified and assumed your desired new self, your Savior, Jesus.
Okay, and Moses. He never entered the Promised Land.
Right. Moses' death and burial, where the Bible says, "No man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day," means you must completely die to what you currently are. Like, metaphorically, write your own obituary for that old self. You have to bury the old man so thoroughly that no part of that former concept, that former identity, is taken into the new state, the promised land of your fulfilled desire. You can't put the new wine of a fulfilled state into the old bottles of the limited self, right?
That makes sense. The old limitations just can't contain the new potential.
Yeah.
It would burst them.
Precisely. And that powerful story of Barabbas being released instead of Jesus at Passover, that's also seen as an internal drama. Barabbas represents your present concept of self, the thief, that robs you of your potential, keeps you bound to your current limitations.
The state I'm currently in.
Yes, and Jesus is your Savior, the new desired concept you wish to express, the state you want to embody. So to experience the Passover, which means to pass over from the old limited state to the new expanded state,
You have to release Barabbas.
you have to clamor for the release of the state that limits you, let go identifying with it, and you have to assume Jesus, assume the new concept, embody it, and Pilate, the judge who makes the decision. He's also within you. You represent your internal power to choose which state you identify with.
So the whole drama of Passover, it's happening inside me right now whenever I try to change my state of being.
According to this perspective, absolutely. And it makes perfect sense then that your external senses and your reasoning mind, which are tied to the old self, Barabbas, and the 3D world, would deny your assumption of being the new self, Jesus.
Yeah, the room around me, my bank balance, my relationships, they all scream, nope, you're still Barabbas. This Jesus thing is just wishful thinking.
Exactly. They tell you you've been self-deceived, that the assumption is false, and that's the challenge. It's real.
So what do you do?
The source insists you must deny the evidence of your senses. Not fight it, necessarily, but refuse to accept it as the final reality, and refuse to enter into discussions either with other people or even just arguing with yourself about whether your assumption is possible based on the current facts.
That sounds like discipline, real mental discipline.
It is. Discipline, yes. It's not just about the technique. It's about controlling your mental diet, constantly. The source talks about being the policeman of your own thoughts.
A policeman? How so?
It means constant vigilance. You have to refuse to enter into conversations again, external or internal, or even listen attentively to things that are unlovely, discouraging, things that tear down your assumption or reinforce the old state. It's about actively choosing where you place your mental focus and consciously redirecting it again and again.
Like that verse, Philippians.
Exactly. The source quotes it often. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. You consciously cultivate the thoughts and feelings that align with your desired state.
And this idea of controlling your internal state, this mental discipline, it connects back to other biblical figures too.
Oh, yes. Think about the two kinds of virgins mentioned in the parables, the wise and the foolish.
Right, the ones with oil and ones without.
They're seen as representing two fundamental outlooks available to us. The foolish virgins represent the carnal mind, the mind that sees and believes only what the five senses dictate in the instant now. No foresight, no inner vision. The wise virgins represent the mind of Christ, the consciousness that sees reality beyond the limitations of the senses, perceiving the deeper reality in the spiritual, or that dimensionally larger world. They have the oil, the inner feeling, the conviction.
And the meek man inheriting the earth.
Yes. The source describes the meek man not as being timid or weak, but as having a tamed mind, Someone who is in complete control of their moods, their thoughts, their internal reactions. Someone who can maintain a high internal state, the feeling of the wish fulfilled, regardless of what chaos might be happening externally. That's the mind that inherits its desired reality.
A tamed mind inherits the earth. That's a powerful reinterpretation.
Yeah.
What about forgiveness? That's huge in the Bible. How does it fit here?
Forgiveness, in this interpretation from the source, is really about complete forgetfulness. Yeah. It's not just saying the words, "I forgive you," while still holding the grudge inside.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It's about changing your fundamental concept of the other person by mentally seeing them, believing them to be what they desire to be, or seeing them from the perspective of their highest potential rather than dwelling on their past actions or mistakes. That's how you truly forgive them. If you still remember the offense, still feel the sting, still hold on to that negative concept of them, you haven't truly forgiven from this perspective. You're still carrying that old state, that old baggage.
So it links right back to changing your concept of yourself. You have to change your concept of others, too, if they're part of the picture you want to change.
Precisely. Which leads directly to another key discipline the source talks about, revision.
Revision, you mean like mentally changing the past? How can you do that?
Yes, exactly that. It sounds radical, but the teaching is you mentally revisit events of your day, maybe an argument, a disappointment, a mistake, or even hurts and traumas from further back.
And you rewrite them.
You rewrite them in your imagination. You replace what actually occurred with a revised, more desirable version. Imagine the conversation going well, the outcome being positive. And the source states, quite boldly, that this act of revision literally changes the past within you. And by changing the inner record, it changes future events that would have flowed from the original unrevised past.
So dwelling on the old, unwanted stuff just keeps it alive.
Exactly. It perpetuates its influence. Revision is seen as breaking that chain. You starve the unwanted past of your mental energy and attention, and you feed the desired outcome instead. It's a way of cleaning up your consciousness.
Okay, so these biblical stories, they're not ancient history. They're psychological dramas playing out inside us, showing the dynamics of consciousness, creation, letting go, revision, all of it. Can we maybe explore a few more key allegories that the source really digs into?
Absolutely. A really fundamental one is the creation story in Genesis 1. God created man in his own image, gave him dominion. This just loops right back to the core philosophy. Consciousness is God. Man is created in that image, meaning man is that creative power with dominion over his experienced world.
Simple, direct. What about in Genesis 2, where Adam names all the creatures? Whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof.
Yeah, that scene is incredibly powerful. From this perspective, it shows the creative power of man's consciousness, represented by Adam, to define reality, to call things forth. What you are conscious of being, and therefore what you name and define in your inner world through your assumptions and feelings, that's what manifests in your outer world. Your assumptions literally name things into existence for you.
Okay. Then there's a maybe less discussed story, certainly more complex, Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38. It's quite earthy.
It is. And the source tackles it directly because it sees profound psychological truth hidden there. Judah, whose name itself relates to the sacred name of God, Jodhevau, represents the creative principle, consciousness. He encounters Tamar, who represents the beautiful desired state, the goal.
And he gives her pledges, a ring, bracelet, staff.
Yes. Those pledges are seen as potent symbols of his creative power, his identity, components related to God's name and authority. By giving these pledges his very essence, his creative seed to the desired state, Tamar, a son, which means a manifestation, a result, is produced.
So the phallic frame, as the source calls it.
Yes, the source notes the ancient storytellers used that framework, which might seem strange or even crude to us today, precisely because it served as a potent metaphor for the act of creation. Giving your creative potency, the very seed of your identity and power, linked symbolically to God's name, to the desired state and imagination, in order to produce a concrete result in the world. It's about impregnating the desired state with your own consciousness.
Wow. A deeply symbolic language layered with meaning about how we create. Okay, what about Isaac, Esau, and Jacob? That's a really rich family drama.
Oh, yes. In this view, you are the blind father. Isaac representing man, the consciousness that perceives and blesses reality through feeling. And both sons, Esau and Jacob, are states of consciousness within you.
Both of them.
Both. Esau is your rough, hairy, sensibly known world. Your present circumstances, the state you currently occupy, known through your five senses. Jacob, the smooth-skinned one, is your desired state, the supplanter, who wants to take Esau's place.
So the story of blessing Jacob instead of Esau.
It's the blueprint. The core teaching here is that you must bless Jacob, meaning you concentrate your attention, your feeling, your belief entirely on the desired state. Feel it real. And you consciously remove your attention from Esau, from the present world of limitations, the unwanted state. You feel for Jacob until he feels more real than Esau.
Right. Removing attention from the unwanted state, not necessarily denying it exists out there, but withdrawing your focus, your energy from it.
That's a subtle but really important distinction, yes. Sometimes actively denying something just reinforces it because you're focused on it. Removing attention allows it to fade from your consciousness and makes room for the desired state, Jacob, to solidify and take its place.
Okay. How about the cloud and the tabernacle from the Exodus and Numbers stories, that journey through the wilderness? That seems very allegorical.
Extremely. The cloud that guides the Israelites is allegorized as the garment of your consciousness, your assumption, the state you are currently dwelling in mentally and emotionally. The tabernacle, the tent they carry, represents your physical body and your current external circumstances, your life situation.
And the cloud leads the tabernacle.
Always. The key here is that the tabernacle, your body, your life, only moves and progresses. When the cloud, your consciousness, your assumption, ascends and moves to a new location, a new state, the teaching is crystal clear. To change your external circumstances, you must first place your consciousness, the cloud, where you want to be. Assume you're already there, feel it. Then your physical circumstances, the tabernacle, will gravitate to conform to where your consciousness is dwelling.
That sounds exactly like that personal story mentioned in the source, Neville's trip to Barbados, right?
Yes. That's the perfect illustration of this allegory put into practice. He desperately wanted to go, but had no money, no means. But he placed his consciousness firmly in Barbados. He slept nightly in his imagination as though he were already physically there, feeling the reality of the tropical air, the sounds, everything.
Even though his physical body was in cold New York City?
Exactly. And circumstances totally unexpected ones, like a letter from his brother he hadn't heard from, an unexpected cablegram offering passage on a ship, a last-minute cancellation that freed up a cabin, and they all conspired in ways he absolutely could not have planned. They literally built that bridge of incident to send his physical body, his tabernacle, to follow his consciousness, the cloud. And his teacher, Abdullah, kept insisting, "You are in Barbados." He wouldn't let him compromise by acting from the old reality of lack.
Incredible how the external world just seemed to reshape itself to match his sustained inner state. Okay, let's look at Joshua and Rahab. Joshua 6, the spies entering Jericho, the promised land.
Right. Rahab, the woman who helps the spies, is interpreted quite fascinatingly. She's seen as the spirit of the Father within you, representing man's capacity to feel, his receptive nature. She's also called a harlot in the text.
Yeah, that's always seemed a bit strange.
But from this perspective, it signifies that this feeling capacity gives itself wholly and indiscriminately to the assumption whatever concept or state is impressed upon it. It doesn't judge, it just receives and embodies the feeling. And she's also a spy because imagination travels secretly, undetected by the outer world, by reason.
So Joshua uses Rahab.
Joshua, representing the disciplined consciousness, uses this capacity to feel the desired state as real, symbolized by Rahab's help and protection, to enter the Promised Land. The Promised Land here is seen as that fourth dimensional world, the dimensionally larger reality, where desires are already concrete realities just waiting to be occupied. Your ability to feel your assumption as vividly real is Rahab, the crucial element that gets you across the border into the desired state.
So my capacity to fully feel the desired state, that's the spy, the harlot, the spirit of the Father, all helping me cross over into that new reality. Wow. Okay, how about the man at the pool of Bethesda in John 5? He's been waiting there for 38 years for the waters to be stirred.
Another powerful psychological drama. The pool itself is seen as your consciousness. Desire is the angel that disturbs the pool, that stirs the possibility of change within you. And the rule was, the first one into the deserved pool gets healed.
So who's the first one in?
From this perspective, you are always the first one in, because you are the only being in your world who can truly say, I am what you want to be. Now, you don't need any external person or condition, no man, to push you into the pool. Your assumption, feeling yourself to be healed or whole now, is what puts you into the healing desired state instantly. You jump in first by claiming, I am that.
So waiting for external conditions is missing the point.
Completely. And the fact that the healing happens on the Sabbath is significant too. The Sabbath symbolizes a state of stillness, rest, and unconcern. You enter this state after you make the assumption, knowing it's done. You know that signs and external confirmations will follow the internal shift. They don't precede it. You don't keep checking anxiously.
Rest in the assumption. Okay. And one more, the woman of Samaria at the well in John 4. Jesus asks her for a drink. She talks about her 5 husbands.
Right. The well again is consciousness itself, the deep source of living water, of reality. The woman represents reliance on the 5 senses to define reality, symbolized by her 5 husbands. She's drawing water, truth, from the external world through her senses.
And the current man she's with isn't her husband.
Yes, the current one, the 6th, is not thy husband. This points to the limitation, the impermanence of relying purely on the sensory or carnal outlook for your ultimate reality. It's not your true source or support. Jesus offering her living water symbolizes the path to true, lasting fulfillment through reliance on the self within, on consciousness, I am, rather than seeking validation or reality solely through external sensory experience. Drink from within.
These interpretations are incredibly consistent, aren't they? Always pointing back to consciousness, imagination, assumption, feeling. But it's one thing to talk about allegories. It's another to see if this stuff actually works for people. Are there other real-world examples from the source material besides the famous Barbados trip?
Oh yes, definitely. The source recounts several personal anecdotes, specifically as illustrations that this isn't just theory. We sort of integrated the Barbados trip with the Cloud Tabernacle allegory because it fits so perfectly, but there are others.
Like what?
Well, there's the story of Dr. Robert Millikan, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. You wouldn't necessarily expect someone like that to use these methods. But the source says he achieved significant goals by using a simple, persistent affirmation, rooted in feeling.
What did he do?
He would apparently repeat, I have a lavish, steady, dependable income, consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. Repeating it nightly, feeling the security and abundance of it until that idea really dominated his mind. And his circumstances eventually aligned to bring that financial reality about.
Just a specific, powerful phrase repeated until it felt absolutely real, shifting his inner state.
Exactly. Then there was a friend, described in the source, who managed to change the behavior of a habitually rude producer she had to work with. This producer was apparently quite difficult.
We've all known people like that. What did she do? Silently argue back.
No, quite the opposite. Instead of replaying his rudeness internally or complaining about it, she started revising her concept of him every night in her imagination. She mentally pictured him being kind, thoughtful, and thankful towards her. She really felt the reality of that kindness in her imaginary scene.
Did it work?
Over time, yes. His actual behavior towards her dramatically changed, becoming pleasant and cooperative, perfectly aligning with her new internal assumption about him.
So wait, she influenced his reality, his behavior, by changing her inner assumption and her inner conversations about him. That really challenges how we think about relationships and influence.
According to the source, yes, absolutely. Because your outer world, which includes the behavior of other people towards you, is seen as a direct reflection of your inner state and your concepts, your assumptions about them. Change the inner picture, the outer has to conform.
Wow. Okay, any others? Maybe simpler ones?
There's a lovely simple story about a young boy who desperately wanted a collie puppy. But the family had no money for one, maybe not much space. It seemed impossible.
So what did he do? Beg his parents?
Nope. He just persistently, every night before sleep, imagined hugging the collie puppy. He felt its fur, maybe smelled that puppy's smell, felt the warmth and excitement of having it. He lived in the end result.
And did a stray collie just show up?
Even better, in a way. He ended up winning exactly the collie puppy he wanted in an essay contest about, of all things, how to care for a pet. A means he or his parents hadn't even considered. The bridge of incident appeared.
Imagining the feeling of having it now, not figuring out how he would get it. That's the pattern.
Yes. And one more. A friend who needed a bank loan paid off quite urgently. A stressful situation.
What did he do? Worry. Try to find extra work.
He did something purely mental. Instead of dwelling on the debt and the worry, he mentally revised his bank statement in his imagination. He pictured the balance due column showing all zeros. He felt the relief of it being paid off. Later, completely unexpectedly, he received a mid-year bonus from his company, which was unusual in itself, and it was large enough to pay off the entire loan in one go.
Just like that.
Just like that. And these examples, along with others mentioned briefly in the source, things like selling a difficult house, getting a specific car, finding a needed beach rental, even someone finding a husband, they all underscore the same consistent point the source makes again and again. That these things manifest in ways the conscious, reasoning mind, operating strictly from our usual three-dimensional perspective, could never devise or predict. That dimensionally greater self, Your own consciousness operating at a deeper level influences the behavior of others and orchestrates circumstances, sometimes in very surprising ways, to fulfill the assumption that was faithfully made and felt in imagination. And this brings us right back to that core idea of states of consciousness. The Source describes these states not just as fleeting moods, but as permanent, fixed realities, almost like different rooms or maybe different dimensions you can choose to inhabit.
Like actual places, but states of mind, like rooms you can walk into or out of.
Exactly like that analogy. And we as individuals enter these states. Sometimes we do it consciously by choice, using techniques like assumption, but maybe more often we enter them inadvertently, just through our habitual thinking, our dominant feelings, our reactions to the external world.
So I could be living in the state of lack without even realizing I chose it.
Precisely. And while you are occupying a particular state, say, the state of poverty or the state of resentment or the state of being unrecognized, you tend to see only the contents of that state. You're sort of compelled to think, feel, and act in accordance with that state. Think about the difference between looking at the world from the state of poverty versus the state of abundance, or the state of health versus the state of illness. Each state has its own landscape, right? Its own set of perceived facts, possibilities, and limitations.
Okay. And just trying to change my external circumstances, like getting a bit more money without leaving the underlying state of poverty, that won't work long term. I might get a temporary win, but I'll just default back.
That's exactly what the Source suggests. You might get a temporary boost, a lucky break, maybe win a small lottery prize. But if you haven't fundamentally moved from the underlying state of consciousness that created the lack in the first place, you will likely just gravitate back to similar circumstances eventually, because you haven't changed the inner cause, the state itself.
So the real change happens inside.
Yes. The fundamental teaching is that moving out of one state and consciously moving into another state in your imagination, feeling yourself to be in the new state, now that's what automatically creates the lasting change in your outer world. The outer world has to conform to the new state you now occupy internally.
And those biblical characters we talked about earlier, Moses, Noah, Job, Peter, Barabbas, Jesus, they are basically personifications of these various states that we can choose to occupy or embody.
Exactly. They're interpreted as representing different states of consciousness, different psychological attitudes, or different principles that we can embody or experience in our own lives. Each story shows the characteristics and consequences of living in that particular state.
Okay. Shifting gears just slightly, let's talk about faith. It's obviously a central theme in the Bible, and the Source must define it quite specifically, building on everything we've discussed.
It does, and it's quite different from just blind belief. According to the Source, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. It's not belief in something outside of you that might help. It is the inner conviction, the actual feeling that what you desire already is a fact in that dimensionally larger reality, right now, before your physical senses give you any permission slip or evidence.
So the feeling is the substance. The feeling is the evidence.
Yes. The feeling of the wish fulfilled provides the substance on the evidence that faith requires. Faith isn't hoping it will happen. Faith is knowing it is happening or has happened on that deeper level.
And this brings us right back full circle to I am.
Fundamentally, it all comes back to that. I am is God's revealed name in the Bible. It's the only statement you can truly make in the first person present tense. Everything else is memory or anticipation. And everything that you attach to I am, well, that defines your state of consciousness, your reality. The Source stresses again and again what you are conscious of being you are.
So if I habitually think, or worse, say out loud, I am sick, or I am broke, I am lonely, I am unlucky, I'm literally using that ultimate creative power, God's name, to define and create exactly those negative states in my reality.
Exactly right. You are using the divine name, the creative power within you, to affirm and perpetuate your limitations. The Source really stresses the absolute importance of watching every thought, every inner conversation that contains I am, or even just implies a state of being. Watch how you complete that sentence.
And it warns about the word if, too.
Yes, be careful with if when talking about your desires, because if tends to push things into the hypothetical, the past or the future, not the present reality of I am. The bottom line is you inevitably experience what you consciously or unconsciously believe I am.
So the practice is what?
The practice is to consciously, deliberately claim I am whatever it is you desire to be. Not just repeating empty words like a parrot, but cultivating the feeling and the inner conviction, the belief, that it is true now. Feel wealthy, feel healthy, feel loved now.
And all of this entire quite radical understanding of Consciousness, imagination, creation, states. It all rests on a single foundation.
Yes. The source identifies the rock, the only true and lasting foundation upon which we should build our lives, as Christ Jesus. And Christ Jesus in this teaching is consistently defined as your own human imagination.
My imagination is Christ. That's the foundation of reality.
From this perspective, yes, that's the creative power within. And interestingly, the Hebrew word for stone, even evan, is often linguistically related to concepts of creating, building, or begetting children. So God, the stone, the creative principle, is described in allegories as being buried or hidden in man, often symbolized by places like Zion, sometimes depicted as a barren place needing building as his own wonderful human imagination.
So my own capacity to imagine, that's the fundamental creative power, the rock, buried within me, just waiting for me to use it, to build my life upon it.
That's precisely the idea. You build your life's events, your circumstances, your relationships, your experiences, sometimes called your children in these allegories, upon this one foundation, your human imagination.
And just like building a physical house, I guess what you build with really matters, right?
Oh, crucially. The source strongly warns against building with wood, hay, and stubble. Things like negative judgments, harsh criticisms, fear-based assumptions about yourself or other people. That's like trying to build a solid structure with flimsy materials that will just burn up or collapse under pressure.
So what should you build with?
You should build with gold, silver, and precious stones, noble concepts, loving assumptions, high ideals, assumptions that dignify yourself and others. Assume the best. And if you truly deeply believe that your human imagination is the only creative foundation, the source says you won't be impatient, you won't feel anxious, you won't resort to force or manipulation or violence in your efforts to achieve your desires. Because you know the real creative work, the actual building, is done in imagination by assuming the end, assuming the wish fulfilled. The outer manifestation is just the inevitable result.
Okay. So to try and bring this incredible deep dive together, the core message seems to be your consciousness, your fundamental sense of I amness is presented here as the one and only reality. It is the creative power, often called God.
Right.
Your imagination isn't just fantasy. It's the living tool. It's God in action within you.
Exactly.
And by consciously assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled now, you are actually accessing and entering a dimensionally larger world where that state, that reality, already exists as a finished fact.
Already done.
And then circumstances here in our familiar three-dimensional world will inevitably rearrange themselves to conform to that internal assumption you're holding.
They have to. It's law.
But to do this effectively, you have to be willing to die to the old concept of who you are, let go of the old limitations and beliefs. And you have to persist in the feeling of the new self without constantly wavering or looking outside for validation, trusting the process.
Persistence and faith in the unseen reality within.
And realizing that creation isn't something you struggle to make happen through effort out here. It's something you access because it's already finished in that greater reality. You're just selecting what you want to experience.
That beautifully summarizes the core message and the practical framework it offers, doesn't it?
It really does. Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final provocative thought to maybe sit with and consider after this deep dive. It's drawn directly from the source material. What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be.
What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be. What does that statement really mean for the reality you're experiencing right now? And maybe more importantly, what does it imply about the reality you desire to create?